Morning, everybody. Happy Has She Gone Yet Day. And welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined for the first time by the Mirror's political editor, John Stevens. Good morning, John.
Hey, Susie.
Hopefully the Mirror's parliamentary office internet is going to hold up long enough for us to get through this. Now, John is the new Pipper, everybody. He is freshly washed, having served his time at the Daily Mail. So be gentle with him, please, everyone, this morning. Now, this is the People's Paper Review. So get into the comments, ask us your questions. Those of you listening later on podcasts are just going to have to hunker down and wait for the next disaster to unfold. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the story of war hero Stanley Solomons, who had to wait 26 hours on a trolley before being admitted to hospital. Now, more on that story later. But first, because John's here, I want to look inside at pages 8 and 9, where Liz Truss is facing her next big headache. A story with John Stevens' byline on it. Now, you report here, John, that she's got a battle over pensions coming. The Tories invented this thing called the triple lock, which means that state pensions must rise by average wages, inflation, or 2.5% every year, whichever is the highest. Unfortunately for Liz, the ONS reports this morning that inflation has hit 10%. That's an increase from last month. It's a 40-year high. If Truss raises pensions by 10%, John, she's got to find billions of pounds, and we've all just found out that she doesn't know where to find money from. So what is she going to do about this, do you think?
Yeah, well, it's only a couple of weeks ago that Liz Truss was recommitting to this pensions lock. She was saying that people's pensions was going to go up with inflation, but we know what's happened in the last few weeks. The Tories tried to do that tax cut for millionaires. They lifted the cap on bankers' bonuses, and that led to kind of market turmoil. They basically crashed the economy, and now there's a massive black hole in their finances. And so Liz Truss and her new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, are going to have to come forward with a new budget at the end of the month. And now they're threatening to do all sorts of things, loads of things that they promised even just a couple of weeks ago. Now they're having to rethink. And one of those things is pensions. And they're suggesting that rather than going up by about 10%, which is, as we know, inflation at the moment, might go up with a smaller figure, maybe about 5%. That would mean that individual pensioners would lose more than £400 a year. So those people really struggling to make ends meet at the moment are just going to find it even more difficult.
Yeah. Now, Laura says, I had a letter at the start of the tax year. My estimated age I can get my pension is 74. Good luck if you happen to lose your job between, the ages of, say, 50 and 73, because the chance of you being re-employed at something is pretty slim in those years. But 74, Edda's lucky if you've still got a pension, even to get then, Laura. She's got this issue, though, isn't she, John, that she's got to try and find billions and billions and billions. And if she tries to find billions from anywhere, really, the markets are going to react badly at the moment. And that's what she's trying to do, is settle everything down and show fiscal responsibility. But if she shows fiscal responsibility with a real terms cut in pensions, when there's an energy crisis, when there's already pensioners we're seeing on the news every night who aren't heating their homes, she's going to suffer at the ballot box, isn't she? Hard, because the older people are more likely to vote Tory.
She's really going to suffer at the ballot box. I think yesterday I was talking to one Tory MP who was saying it's almost like she's got a zero voter strategy now, that the few people who are still saying they're going to back the Tories at the next election, many of them will be put off by this. We know a lot of the Tory base, people who regularly vote Tory, tend to be slightly older. They're going to be people affected by this. I can see why she wants to kind of put out this message that she's trying to balance the books after the mess of the last few weeks. I think she has to be realistic about what she's going to be able to get through Parliament. And you speak to Tory MPs and they are so angry about this. They know that their constituents will be really cross. They know they will get lots of emails. They know it will put their jobs at risk at the next election. I just can't see even Tory MPs voting for this and letting it go through Parliament.
Yeah, that's one of the other issues, isn't it? She's got a party that she can't govern at the moment. Now, keep asking your questions, everybody. We just had one there for Mike. If we can bring that one back up, because I didn't memorize all of it before it flashed away again. Now, Mike says, assuming she turns up, what is Liz Truss going to be asked at Prime Minister's questions today? There's no point asking about policy. She's got no policies left to defend. And even if she's asked about the pensions triple lock or benefits linked to inflation, she can't answer. I suppose the answer for Mike there then is that she's going to be giving non-answer answers, isn't she? Because the MPs are all going to say what's happening about benefits, what's happening about pensions, and she's going to have to give the kind of answer that says that will all be sorted out later. I can't tell you now.
Yeah, although last week at PMQ, she did answer some of the questions. Keir Starmer said to her, are we going to end up with cuts to public spending? And she said, absolutely not. And we know now, a week later, that that is what the government are looking at. So I think whatever she does say to Keir Starmer, he will be bringing that up and saying, hang on a minute, how can we trust anything you say or promise? Because everything you do, it seems to go to dust. Days later, remember last week, Kwasi Kwarteng, was it on Thursday, said that absolutely 100% he would still be the Chancellor in a month's time. And he didn't even make 24 hours after that.
Yeah,
before
I think it was Friday morning's paper, wasn't it, in front of the Telegraph? I'm not going anywhere. Back home, fired. Goodbye.
Exactly.
That's what happens if you speak to the Daily Telegraph. Now, it's clear that Liz Truss is going to get it in the neck, probably from all sides, at PMQs today. I was speaking to someone yesterday who said he couldn't see a way that she would make it through PMQs and still be Prime Minister. But who knows? I'm sure that will be being streamed here on the Mirror's Facebook pages. So if you want to keep an eye on what's happening, then do tune in here later on. And perhaps, John, as you were saying there, perhaps she's like a Labour sleeper agent, because there doesn't seem to be a Tory electorate. This woman's not prepared to smash to smithereens homeowners, bankers, pensioners. I mean, she is going to have no one left to vote for her by the end of it. And in the bottom of a box on that spread there, it points out that there are 45 Tory seats in the home counties' heartlands, which are at risk as a result of the high interest rates and the effect that has on mortgages. Those are people they could usually guarantee going to vote Tory, not anymore. So how is she knows there's an election coming. She knows it's sooner rather than later. At latest, it's January 2025, but that's not very far away. It could be next week, the way things are going. How is she expecting to possibly win that?
Goodness, how is she expecting to even be there as Tory leader? We know when she got interviewed by Chris Mason on the BBC the other night, what was it, Monday evening, he said to her, are you still going to be PM at the next election? And she said, yes, I am going to be. And then he said, are you sure? And then she did this awkward laugh, which would suggest that even she's beginning to realise that reality, that's not going to happen. I just don't think Tory MPs are going to let her do that. They're worried about their seats. They want to keep their jobs after all. And I think they realise that Liz Truss, after the catastrophe of the last month, isn't really the great salesman who's going to be able to encourage people to vote Tory.
No, she had this terrible moment when he said, definitely, are you going to be PM? That she just blinked. She flickered like the wheel of death was spinning round and round on the software. It was like, it was worse than the Theresa May robot memes that we had. It was something is misfired. It was a bit grim. Now, keep asking your questions, everybody. What do you think Liz should do about the triple lock on pensions? Should she raise pensions by 10%? Most pensioners do not have a lot of money. And how are they going to target it at people who need it the most? There are some wealthy pensioners, but they've always refused to, how can I put it? Oh, yes, means test the state pension for very good reason. So how on earth are they going to find a way to do this? They've got to find billions of pounds, and she can't just magic up a thin air, because the markets will react very badly to that, and she'll be gone again anyway. She's got the devil in the deep blue sea. What could she do? Now, you've been around Westminster, John, and you've been speaking to the politicians and going out there lunching them. And I keep hearing from Truss's side that there's not a lot of plotters. There's only a few people being a bit noisy. It's not that bad. She's been having these receptions in Number 10, trying to give them some warm white wine and warm words. And they say also there's just no candidate to coalesce around, so she's fine, and they've got to keep her in there. Is that true?
There's certainly loads of plotters. There's loads of Tory MPs who realise that she has not done a great job as Prime Minister. I think you speak to almost all Tory MPs, and they'd accept that. Even people who backed her in the leadership election. A former cabinet minister who was one of those people who kind of went out and campaigned for her was saying to me the other day that he backed Liz Truss because she thought she was going to be dull. He wanted no more drama after the days of Boris Johnson. Instead of getting no more drama, she seems to have just poured petrol on everything and just caused absolute chaos. But even though Tory MPs seem decided that she's a bit rubbish and she's not done a great job, they cannot agree on who comes next. I think that's why we're stuck with her for the time being. Most of them seem to be thinking they'll hang on until Halloween, when Jeremy Hunt, the new Chancellor, is going to come out with his new budget to overwrite the old one. And so I think a lot of people wait for them. That will be the real danger point. And then just a few days after the 31st of October, you've got the Bank of England announcement on mortgage rates. And now we're expecting that interest rates are going to go up. There's going to be a massive jump in interest rates. And as you were talking about mortgages just now, we know that there are so many people around the country on fixed term deals that are coming up, expiring all the time. And then when they go to remortgage their home, they find they're paying hundreds and hundreds of pounds more every month. So I think that is going to be a big moment. I think the start of November is looking really choppy for her. But let's see how it goes at Prime Minister's questions today. I think expectations are so low. People know that Liz Truss isn't the great performer. So even if she does all right, that might be enough for her to get through the next couple of weeks. But she could really do with some good days. Whether you liked Boris Johnson or hated him, he had some really bad days, but he did have some good days. He had some days when he really seemed to G up the Tory side. He had some good days on Ukraine. He had some good days where he gave quite good speeches. But speaking to someone yesterday, we were struggling to think of any day since Liz Truss has been Prime Minister that has been really classed as a good day. And she doesn't really seem to have any at all. That she really does need some improvement if she's going to carry on.
I would suggest that those 10 days where there was no politics, because the Queen had died, was probably the high point of Liz Truss's prime ministerial career. Who knows?
Yeah.
Will judge, won't they, whether she suddenly gets in a better Christmas. Now, Mike says, I retired to Spain in 2015. Brexit and the pound crippled the amount I have to live on. I have the OAP and a small NHS pension, the old one, which is far less than the new pension. There is no triple lock rise, which would be another nail in my coffin. And no, I'm not entitled to any benefits either from Spain or the UK. This is the thing, isn't it? There's people in so many different situations. Pensioners like Mike in Spain have a right to vote. Here in the UK, they're still citizens, and they're still reliant upon the state pension. And there are people in this country as well who are wondering. I was hearing on the radio this morning suggestions that you can start using own brand food, and you can economise like this, that, and the other, or not waste food. There are people who were already using own brand food. I am already, when I cook a chicken, right, it's cold meat in sandwiches, it's a couple of cold dinners, I boil the carcass up for stock to make soups. There's not a scrap of food wasted in my house because there's a single income and I'm a parent. But how on earth are people supposed to trim the fat when there is no fat to trim? People like Mike are not going to be able to cope if their pensions don't go up. And pensioners here as well are going to have exactly the same problem. I mean, what we're talking about here, John, I suppose I'm saying it's not just politics. It's not just, argy about what Liz Truss's situation may be. It's life or death about other people. And I'm not sure she gets that.
No, and it isn't just the price of a few things going up. It's the price of everything going up. People's energy bills have gone up loads. Now people's food bills are going up loads. We talked about that inflation rate earlier, talked about how prices across the board have gone up just over 10% in the last year. If you look at just the specific price of food inflation is now 14.6%. So that means that a basket of shopping that cost £100 last September, this September it cost £114.60. When you think that people, are just not sure where people are going to be able to make these savings to make the sums add up, and people are lucky enough to have their own homes, their mortgage rates are going up, people who rent, their kind of accommodation prices are going through the roof as well. And particularly talk about pensioners who are on a set kind of income. They're not, you know, if you're 90, you're 80, you're 70, suddenly all your prices have gone up, but your pension hasn't increased. What can you really do about that? You're not going to suddenly go out and get a job to be able to work some extra hours because you've retired. But people just are having a situation where they can't put their heating on, they can't go and visit relatives, they can't even afford a bus ticket. It is just really miserable for a lot of people.
No, it's going to be a very sticky winter. Keep an eye out on your nearest and dearest and your neighbours, everybody. And we have to find a way to get ourselves through it, because I don't think the government's going to help very much. Now, we need to go back to that page one story about Stanley Solomons. His horrific day and a night spent waiting for a hospital bed at the Queen's Medical Centre in Nottingham this Sunday. Now, his daughter Rachel, who is a Labour councillor, as the story points out, but was also by his side the whole time, so she knows exactly what she saw. She said the staff were amazing. They were rushed off their feet. They showed incredible stamina and care for her father, but there were just no beds. And there were patients as well stacking up in the corridors and outside A&E, where paramedics couldn't offload them because they couldn't get them out of A&E onto a ward because the patients on a ward weren't being discharged properly. And this is the second time it has happened to Stanley. We reported in the Mirror in 2019 that he had a 12-hour wait. Now, that's the thing here, John, isn't it? In 2019, 12 hours to get a hospital bed was worth a column lead in Roswyn Jones' Real Britain column there. It was so bad. It was astonishing and shocking and horrifying. And in 3 years, it has more than doubled to 26 hours. And the government seems to have done nothing to ease this. We have known this is happening and getting worse for years. Have they tried to fix this and I've just missed it and Stanley's just unlucky, or have they completely ignored the problem?
Well, Therese Coffey, the new Health Secretary, she talks about A, B, C, D, her priorities. A is ambulances, B is backlogs from COVID, C is care, D is doctors and dentists. I wasn't sure I was going to remember all of those then. But on ambulances, this is a problem all around. This is a problem all around the country. This isn't just an isolated thing with poor Stanley. This is happening in hospitals everywhere where there are long waits. People are struggling to get an ambulance because the ambulances, when they come to hospital, they're unable to offload patients. And so they're just stuck there. They can't go and get more people. I know this. I grew up in Cornwall. My dad had a problem earlier this year where he called an ambulance. He had a problem with his heart. Eventually did get an ambulance, took him to hospital, and he spent the whole day in a queue outside that hospital in an ambulance. At one point, they took him out of the ambulance to go into the hospital for some tests and then put him back in the ambulance again. And the paramedics who were treating him were saying, well, obviously, this isn't why we became ambulance crews, so we could queue outside hospitals all day. They were saying they're de-skilled now, that rather than being able to do several shouts a day, they basically clock on for their shift, they do one shout, and then they're just stuck queuing the whole time. And I think what's really worrying is we're in October. We're not at the peak of winter yet. We're not at the traditional time where hospitals really struggle and come under massive pressure. And if people are having these problems now, what is the situation going to be when we get into January and February, when it's really cold, when people are having falls? And if you can't, if you fall over in your high street, you might have broken a bone or whatever. Your advice would be don't move. If an ambulance crew can't get to you for 12 hours, what are you meant to do? Just stay there lying in the street for 12 hours in the cold? People are actually going to lose their lives after this.
Yeah, it's horrific. I'm so sorry to hear about your dad as well, John. I know in Cornwall there's like one hospital, isn't there?
It's a total nightmare. Yeah,
everybody's got to go to one place. And Brian says, I thought the last Prime Minister was building new hospitals. There was a lot of photographs, wasn't there, Brian? He was in a high-vis jacket and waving trowels around and stuff on building sites. He definitely built some. I saw the photographs, John. Where are they?
Yeah, well, that is one of the problems that the Tories don't really seem to be able to explain what happened to a lot of these hospitals. There was meant to be at 40 at one point. Then it turned out that a lot of them aren't really new hospitals. They're just a few wards being shunted onto the side of existing ones. And even those ones don't seem to be coming online. They seem to be having problems being built. But you look in today's paper, it isn't just the story of poor old Stanley in there. Just on that same page, on page 5 at the bottom, that is an absolutely harrowing story of an old guy, 94-year-old guy called Kenneth Shadbolt, who lives in Gloucestershire. He called 999. They've got a recording of the call that's been played on Radio 4. And in the call, he said to the ambulance people, "I'm lying on the floor because I've had a bad fall. Oh, I feel terrible sick. I'm in terrible pain. If it's going on another half hour, I'll probably be dead. Send me the undertaker. That will be the best bet. I can't move at all. Oh, it's getting worse. Oh, quick. Send somebody quick." And then the call handler told Ken they'd send an ambulance as quickly as we can, but he was unconscious by the time they arrived 5 hours later. And then he died in hospital. So just absolutely awful, awful stories about what people are experiencing at the moment.
Yeah, and it's real as well. There are call handlers who can't get the ambulance there and are having to listen and deal with those calls and suffering trauma as a result. There are families who are not able to get to their loved one to help them themselves because they're at the other end of the country or something and suffering trauma and grief as a result. And there's obviously people dying in awful, painful situations which should never be happening. Now, at the bottom of that page, it also talks about something else I want to go to. But quickly, just a quick call out. If you have any stories about the NHS or your treatment waits, how well it's been, how bad it's been, whatever, get into the comments, let us know, and we'll try and boost them a bit for you and have a discussion of them. But on the side of the page there that you were talking about, John, there's plans for the NHS to get through the winter. And what you were talking about is what happens if someone falls and the ambulance can't get there. The NHS chief exec says she's going to set up these things called war rooms, she's referred to them as, places to triage patients in hospital to keep them away from A&E. So ease the crisis a bit. So they want to treat respiratory infections, things like flus and COVID, elsewhere out of A&E to keep the two separate, and visit patients who've had falls in their own homes so they don't need an ambulance to get them back into the hospital. But the problem with that I can see is, firstly, if you have respiratory emergencies over here and you're falling over bleeding emergencies there, you still need an emergency doctor at two instead of just one in the A&E, one A&E consultant. You need two on duty, and we don't have them, is number one. And the second thing is, if someone falls in their own home and they're not in the street or the shopping precinct, like you said, John, and say someone's fractured something, but someone comes out, doesn't notice for some reason because they're in a rush, gets the person up and into bed and, makes them a cup of tea and clears off again, they don't get the x-ray. They don't get the check because they're not in the hospital. They don't get it fixed. It's going to lead to tragedies, isn't it? I can see why the NHS has done this, and it looks good on paper, like it's an effort. They're trying, but it's not. It's not going to do it, is it?
Yeah, I think it is good that the NHS is looking at different ideas. There's clearly a massive problem, as we've talked about, and they do need to kind of think outside the box, use a cliche, and think about how do they do things differently. But I think the problem is is so massive at the moment that they are really going to have to take massive radical action to make sure we've not got real problems as the winter goes along.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the longer that Jeremy Hunt's Chancellor, the more likely there's going to be some cuts to NHS services because, let's face it, they're wasting so much money, aren't they? Now, Grandad, not my granddad, but let's just face it, probably everybody's granddad, says Coffey is not the right person at this time. She has already said the NHS can strike if they want because they've already had a pay rise. That was kind of astonishing, wasn't it, John? Which is, well, if the NHS want to go out and strike, they can. Blah, we'll cope, we'll manage. But she's also told stories in Parliament about how she's had long waits at A&E and had to go somewhere else because she couldn't get treatment. She's told people that she shared antibiotics with family members, having not finished the course herself, and then ignoring the fact you're not supposed to share prescriptions with other people. And she apparently only knows the first four letters of the alphabet. So I don't even know what to say about her, really. But is this really the person in charge of the NHS? Am I dreaming? Tell me I'm wrong, John.
Well, she's really important to Liz Truss's government. She's someone who's been pals with Liz Truss ever since they were Tory candidates. Liz Truss's seat is in Norfolk. Theresa Coffey's seat is in Suffolk. They're best friends in Parliament. You can see why Liz Truss wanted someone who was very close to her to be put in that important role. But I think a lot of people will judge Theresa Coffey and what happens in the next few months. It's all fine saying you've got your A, B, C, D priorities. That's quite catchy, is fairly memorable. But what she'll be judged on is, does she actually manage to turn those numbers around? We know on backlogs that the number of people on waiting list operations has now gone over 7 million, which is the first time it's ever been that high. On care, the story around in the papers today that the reforms that the Tories have promised on social care may be delayed by a year or two. And so, yeah, rather than getting on and fixing these things, it seems like the problem's getting worse and worse.
No, I don't buy the idea that Liz Truss, it's obvious that she must have her friends about her. Okay, I've got friends. If I was running the government, I wouldn't assume they're the best person to be in charge of the economy. They might be the best person to go to the pub with, or talk about the old times, or dance to S Club, but they're not necessarily the person who's going to fix the care crisis, are they? Just because they're your mate, Liz. Some skills would also be welcome. Now, Francis says, yesterday, a Tory in Wales was blaming the leader of Welsh Labour about what the Tories had done. He was told in no uncertain way where the blame lay. I think that Welsh Tory is hiding under a desk today. We haven't got it, but there was an astonishing video, wasn't there, John, of Mark Drakeford, the Welsh Labour leader, who was getting barracked in the Senate by the Tory leader in Wales, and just absolutely lost his mind, pretty much. He got so cross. He was tossing his papers around. He was shaking with rage. It was an astonishing thing to see, and he did very much tell the Tory what was what. But I don't think the Tory necessarily took it. But we haven't seen that kind of anger in a public parliament since forever, have we?
No, he was really cross, and as people say, that he's usually quite softly spoken, quite calm, but he really did lose his temper yesterday, and I think that's because a lot of people have seen the problems that we've got with the economy. Yes, there was stuff going on internationally before Liz Truss came in as Prime Minister, but she's made things a lot worse. She's created this massive black hole in the country's finances, which she's now struggling to fill. And so pensioners, people on benefits seem to be the ones who are going to be paying the price for her mistakes. And people who use public services, it sounds like there's going to have to be billions cut from public services. And that means that people's schools won't have the same amount of money, hospitals won't have the same amount of money that they were going to have. And I think that's going to be deeply unpopular with people, especially when they know the reason that we're in this mess is because of Liz Truss.
Yeah, Liz Truss saying stuff, not even doing stuff, just saying stuff. And I don't know where my daughter's school is going to find more money. It hasn't got enough money now. And bear in mind, all the budgets that people are spending right now that were set last year, that money is now not going as fast. So you've got a real terms cut anyway, and then they're talking about cutting the budgets further next year. So it's cuts upon cuts upon cuts. Marvellous. Anyway, let's move on, because we have found some good news in the world. Get into the comments if you want us to ask anything else at the end and wrap up. If there's anything burning a hole in your head, we'll do our best to answer them. But first, the good news. Here it is. Now, there's been a lot of talk in the past few years about free school meals. The Mirror has campaigned, and so has Marcus Rashford, the footballer, for others, for it to be extended onto everyone on universal credit, which would mean about 1 million more children got properly fed while at school. And the Tory government, plural, have been resisting that for years now. But on page 6, the Tories' own food czar, Henry Dimbleby, says it's a no-brainer and it must happen. And research by the accountancy firm PricewaterhouseCoopers has found the move would save £2.5 billion over 20 years because of the improved health and education benefits. You can't get more Tory than a Dimbleby and some accountants, and they all want it. Now, John, is this proof that somewhere in the dark, withered corpse of the Tory party, there's still a beating heart of decency, and they might yet pull through?
Well, clearly the Mirror's been banging the drum on this one. It's a really good cause. People understand that if you increase the number of children who've got free school meals, it helps people learn. It means there isn't a stigma around getting free school meals if every child in the class is getting them. But it does seem to be real pressure on this now, that loads of people seem to be adding to their names to this cause and saying that rather than just giving free school meals to a very small number of children, anyone whose families are in receipt of universal credit should get them. And that would mean that an extra 1 million children across the country would be getting free school meals. We've heard loads of different big figures, people like Jamie Oliver, the TV chef, who's saying it. And yeah, today in the paper, we've got quotes from Henry Dimbleby. He was talking in front of a committee of MPs yesterday. And as you say, he said it was a no-brainer. I think Tory MPs are going to come under a lot of pressure on this. I think a lot of them privately will be saying to the government, should we be having a rethink on this? But, as we were talking about just now, the government seems really short of cash at the moment, thanks to the mess that they've put the economy into. And so, yeah, I'm not sure, without wanting to ruin the good news, I'm not sure the government is fully behind this quite yet.
Well, it's general optimism that there is something somewhere in the Tory heart that we can praise. We're not completely biased on this show, but there is perhaps something there. We'll have to see. But we've got Tory MPs on the one hand saying you've got to spend. On the other hand, there's the city and the markets going, please don't do that. That would be bad. So this is Truss's problem, and if she was a genius, it would be difficult to deal with. She's not a genius. Now, I think we've got one more question just to wrap on. Here we go. Gail says, was the plan all along to bring Boris back? Was hasta la vista, in fact, I'll be back? Is this why Boris backed Liz to ensure he'd be back with all speed? I saw this somewhere a while ago, John, that said Boris he keeps saying to people, back Liz, because he knew she was going to be disastrous and he would be back in sooner rather than later. Is there meat on that bone?
I think he was more saying back Liz because he was so cross with Rishi Sunak, the other candidate who he blamed for his downfall, and he thought Rishi Sunak had stabbed him in the back by resigning. He blamed him for him being kicked out of number 10. So I can see why people are coming up with this theory. I think the reality was it was less about Liz Truss and it was more about his vendetta against Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, so perhaps the fact that Boris Johnson's not a great judge of character was why he said back Liz. Who knows? But that is something we saw a lot of in Boris, wasn't it? So that might make the most sense. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Thank you, John, for coming along. I hope it was a gentle introduction to the world of the news agenda for you. If you're listening on podcast, please leave us a review so other people can find us. And join us again next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda Explained. Tatty bye.